All right, this computer just crashed, and that's just great. Okay, we're gonna finish up with soil food web. We're going over mainly a little recap, but then also just to concrete and re-clarify some of the main effects that these different classes of essentially trophic levels in the soil food web have. Okay, so our macrofauna, right? Our earthworms, our beetles, our dung beetles, and our larger arthropods, right? Main function includes mixing, fragmenting, and transport of organic material. Okay, we have shredding action going on, where those animals are then increasing the surface area of a lot of the plant detritus, such as dead leaves, etc. When the macrofauna feed on detritus, it increases the surface area of that detritus, right? Breaks it into smaller pieces, essentially. Goes through their gut, some of it does, and then becomes further broken down, which increases the surface area even more, which all that extra surface area allows for microbes to have access to do their thing and further break those materials down and change plant litter right, into soil organic matter, right? Organic matter is processed plant organic material, right? In addition to microbial, dead and alive microbial biomass and all the like also, right? Okay, they also improve soil structure and porosity and water movement, as we mentioned in the case of, for instance, the earthworm is doing a couple things, is producing castings, which are nice little aggregates in themselves, and they're also leaving little biofilms along their little pore ways, which serve as little mucigels, as little biological binding agents, which help physically stick together soil colloids, right, and help aggregation. And they improve soil fertility, especially in the case of, say, for instance, earthworms and dung beetles, for instance, which are clearly enriching subsurface soil horizons with mainly with nitrogen, right? When they're bringing down physically a little clump of nitrogen and a little cowpie down a half meter down into the soil, okay? And that's also protecting that organic matter. Not only is it helping the fertility, right, but it's also storing and protecting organic matter in the soil. Our mesofauna, okay, are predators of bacteria and fungi and algae, right? And further fragment, mix, and decompose organic material. So after one of those larger shredders, macropaunas come in and, say, for instance, bitten all the green parts out of a leaf and just left the stem residues, right? Then some of these will come in and start to break those stems apart, some of those focal points, right? For instance, getting a ribeye steak, throwing it to your dog, right? Dog eats all the meat, and then the bone eventually that they can't eat unless it's my dog, will just eat that bone without even blinking and be fine somehow, right? But that bone will eventually just sit there, and then cockroaches will come out and eventually eat that bone until there's nothing, right? Same deal going on. Our microfauna, right? And our nematodes, right, are also predators of, there we go. Also predators of bacteria, fungi, and algae, and are important in releasing plant-available nitrogen. So, for those of y'all that haven't been in plant physiology yet, okay, so plants can't absorb large molecules of nutrients, okay? They can't absorb just a particle of organic matter, right? They need what's called mineral nutrients, right? Or mineralized nutrients, which aren't part of an organic molecule, which aren't just sitting on a big carbon chain, right? So the microfauna are great at, they're feeding on bacteria, fungi, and algae, and those bacteria, fungi, and algae have a lot of nitrogen in them, right? But a lot of it's bound up in their plasma membranes and cell contents and all that, right? So it's at this scale that these animals, our microfauna, are actually releasing individual nutrients, right? As they go along and eat a carbon, right? They're kicking off a little nitrogen, which will either go into nitrate or ammonium, right? And then be small enough to be plant available, okay? And our microbes. Our lovely, lovely microbes, which are really the substrate of our soil food web, okay? They're really the base level where all of our other higher trophic levels are basing their nutriment from, okay? So our microbes are super important in nutrient cycling. Many times they, as we just talked about, they really regulate breakdown of small detrital components, other microbial components, right? Because microbes can also eat microbes, okay? And break apart organic matter to the point that releases plant available nutrients, okay? They can also store it in their microbial biomass, right? And then if that stays safe in a nice little aggregate, a little dead microbial biomass aggregate, then that's a lot of carbon that's going to be stored in the soil that isn't going to be released up into the air as CO2, okay? Our organic matter decomposition and formation. Decomposition, because they're breaking down organic matter on the smallest scales, okay? Such as our fungal hyphae, right? And our small little bacterial cells. And they're also forming organic matter because organic matter does consist of microbial biomass, also dead and alive. Improve soil aggregation and structure. Many of these little microbes have exudates, right, and mucigels that they're forming that helps for soil biological binding agents, right? And then we also have our, for instance, in our mycelium, or a hyphae of fungus, right, we have actual holding, right, which is of the hyphae holding multiple soil colloids, which many times creates small little soil aggregate. Mycorrhizae also aid in water and nutrient uptake, as we looked at, mainly from expanding the rhizosphere, expanding the soil root interface, okay? They provide nitrogen fixation, which up until the 40s was our main method of having biologically available nitrogen, i.e. nitrogen other than into gas, which is inert, right? And we also have pathogen suppression and agents. So this area is, so we have pathogen suppression and we also have agents of pathogens, okay, in our microbial community, right? We have bad bacteria, we have essentially, what we would call good bacteria in certain contexts, okay? So for those of y'all that are interested in Korean natural farming, for instance, we're only now really being able to identify the communities, right? The microbial communities that are having certain effects, right? If they're doing denitrification, if they're doing nitrification, if they're releasing P, right, phosphorus or what have you, right? If they're, creating a whole lot of CO2, if they're creating only a little bit of CO2. So we're only now being able to identify the different communities. Like we said, there's millions and millions and millions of these things in a gram of soil, right? And there are millions and millions and millions of communities. They're all not the same bacteria, right? So they're all doing different things, and in different amounts of different communities, you get an overall different effect, right? Do you have a place that's conducive for plant growth because of a lot of organic matter production, right? Do you have a place that that has no microbial life or limited microbial life, that doesn't have any ability to transfer plant detritus into solid, more aggregated organic matter, right? So we're only now being able to figure out what's going on with those communities and what happens when, say, we move some of those communities from where they were resident into a new place, such as from a forest into a cropland, right? We're only now being able to tell, to see if they still stay there or not. There's one study that looked at just that, actually, and they found that many times when you deliver a community, right, of microorganisms, you deliver it in a substrate, right? They feed on essentially sugar, right? They feed on carbon content, right? So you essentially put them in sugar, and they put them in the new place where they would be, right? And they found that the sugar that they put them in with, the new alien microorganisms, the sugar that they were sitting in fed all the resident microorganisms, and then those microorganisms actually consumed essentially the ones that were put in. And they came back a week later and couldn't find any of the ones they put back in with, right? So we got a million different contexts and a billion different communities of microorganisms, right? So it's really about being able to identify them, being able to identify them before, during, whatever, and after whatever, and see what affects what. So, managing soil for a diverse and healthy soil community. After talking all about these critters, right, we want to have a point and a reason. Hopefully, you all have gleaned throughout this that there's not a whole lot of bad things, right, associated with having a healthy soil organism community, a healthy food web, right, in terms of the soil ecosystem. That can be the case in agronomic context. It can also not be the case in agronomic context, but we wanted to show some of the effects of some of these different species and these species interactions on overall soil health. So we noted that they have things like that soil biodiversity, or a high number of organisms, a high different number of kinds of organisms, right? Supports essential services of humans, including plant growth, water climate regulation, and disease control, among others. Biodiversity is increasingly under threat due to land clearing and agriculture and urbanization. Completely true. And organic farming tends to promote soil biodiversity, mainly in via not applying a lot of products that can kill off life, right? Pesticides, etc. Fungicides, for instance, right? If we're killing for all fungus, then we're also going to be taking out our beneficial fungus. And we just looked at a lot of the things that fungus does, which increases water absorption and nutrient uptake with plants, right? And diverse community is considered an indicator of high soil quality. So we have species diversity, number of species, and distribution numbers, and our functional diversity, which is the value and range of organismal traits that influence ecosystem functioning. That is in relation to us saying which ones do what, right? It helps to know, it would be nice to know all of our different community members' species names, but it could also be nice if we want to take one step back to look at all those species types in groups of what they're doing, right? If they're mineralizing nitrogen, right? If they're making the soil more acidic, right? If they're breaking down lignin, right? If they're breaking down cellulose, right? All right. There's soil organisms. Mahalo, and we'll be up with the next one shortly. Aloha.